Taking a deep breath in, we breathe in peace. We exhale love. And so for those of you just joining us, we just listened to the song If I Die Young by the band Perry, which is going to go perfectly into our sermon for today about joyful sadness and releasing the mundane. But to start off, for those of you who've actually read up to that point in Living Peace, the tenet release release mundane, our intro story, because at the beginning of all of the tenets, we have personalized stories that we share. And at the beginning of this one, we talk about our horror stories of buying this place and remodeling it for 6 months. And it was quite painful. But it allowed, and I'll let Andrew actually speak first, but I'll share a little bit my story after and how to actually really help me awaken to this teaching more than ever before, and the heart of joyful sadness that is taught in Buddhism, and in particular by Chogyam Trungpa in his book Shambhala, The Sacred Path of the Warrior, which I will quote a little bit from in a little bit. But I want to go ahead and start with Andrew-san, the husband monk, and whatever you'd like to start by sharing.
So, yeah, it was very interesting. We moved here again June 1st of 2018, and it was for the Durango area the day that the large fire started. So we're driving up and having this just very peaceful drive, and then we see this giant plume of smoke. And I'm like, is that where we're going? And we're like, oh, maybe not. Looks a little farther. Sure enough, it was right north. And which, greatly affected the area, at least for 3 months.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, we pulled into this place and it was very unreal. We had the key and we opened the door and came in, and we're sort of like, well, we're here now. And we had to go get our P.O. box set up, and which we didn't know about a week before that we'd
No
need.
one told us.
No one told us anything. Literally, there were so many things just about how to set up trash, how to set up our bills, how to get everything going, and we knew nothing. None of it. So it was just a lot of asking around. Like, to find out trash, I literally had to just walk around and look at the dumpsters in the neighborhood just to find a phone number of like who to call. So it was a lot. And then I remember that night we sat over against this wall, which had countertops and mirrors because this was a salon. And we kind of looked out at the town square and people were looking at us through the window, and just kind of had to think about, what our life was going to be like. And then we started tearing the building apart and prying up everything. And then we found out that the carpet that was right here where all of you are on wasn't a regular carpet. Most carpets you just pry up. No, they glued it. They had glued the carpet. So it was literally an inch by inch process. We had to get a crankshaft and hook up a string or a rope to a crank thing hooked to a car that would then pull it. And then it would pull up the carpet little by little with 3 of us with a shovel just doing that. And so it took, a day to get the carpet up, cracking all the tile. And that was just the start. And then we had to stop. Because unbeknownst to us, we were under the impression from multiple people in the community that we could at least do some of that light stuff. And the town came over and said, nope, you have to stop until all the permitting is approved. You have to have an official architect to do everything, which we didn't know an architect. Luckily, one was walking across the street. And so we flagged him down and he ended up becoming our architect, which is great. And then after that, it was probably at least a solid month and a half to 2 where we couldn't do anything.
We just were stuck in the construction zone.
Yeah. So back here, which you can't see behind this wall, there was no wall. So we just had to put up some makeshift room dividers. So again, people couldn't just stare at us while we were walking around.
We're sleeping.
Yeah, we're sleeping. And so we had this tiny little kitchen area, an empty room that was essentially the bedroom, with 2 couches pushed together to sleep on, and then also an air mattress in the middle of the kitchen area.
Well, kitchen's a strong word.
Strong word. It had a big restaurant-style sink with 3 compartments.
And that's it.
That was it. Luckily, eventually we got a fridge, and then this poor fridge was just caked in dust for months, but we had a fridge at least. And then a bathroom with no bath or shower. It just had a sink and a toilet. And so you talk about, raccoon baths from the sink. So just, trying to get clean in that way. And so, yeah, but for about 2 months, we were pretty stuck with just those amenities. 95% of our stuff was in the storage unit that's next to this place, which we think used to be a carport that they may have just put walls around. And so it's just kind of gravel rock in there, and some mice. So we had to deal with that too. Luckily, we got them before they got their stuff.
Well, let me go ahead and talk about the struggle of like the pain and emotional turmoil of that.
Oh yeah. So being stuck in that, and then you got sick, so you had laryngitis.
And I'll speak on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you had a lot of physical pain. But yeah, really having suddenly all of our comforts gone and all of our stuff taken away from us. And we really had no choice but to just sit in here and accept that this was the situation. And once we really accepted it, it hurt a lot less, in just knowing, because if we sat in here and just resisted the whole time, no amount of crying or anger would make it speed up any faster. And so it was a lot of acceptance. And luckily between you and I, we really worked well together.
Yeah, not one fight, not one argument.
Yeah. And so we really just nothing but complete compassion and kindness throughout the whole thing. But even then, eventually when things got moving again, it was still incredibly difficult. But it was interesting that we'd always talked about before moving here that, we wanted this modern monk lifestyle. And then we always said we got what we asked for, because we ended up with everything gone, nothing but a few clothes on our back. And had to definitely work well together, especially because we didn't know anyone either.
Yeah. May I piggyback?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for sharing the introduction. So I like to joke where I was saying, so I had laryngitis, and then I had hemorrhoids, and then the mountain was on fire. So I like to joke how my throat was on fire, my ass was on fire, and the nearby mountain was on fire for a whole fucking month.
Yeah.
And the hemorrhoids arrived right after like sitting on the long journey here. And we didn't have a bath, we didn't have anything. So like normally like Epsom salt baths really help with that. And so literally I was just stuck in pain all throughout my body. And then the smoke was not helping the laryngitis. And so it was this massive combination where I couldn't speak for the whole first month here. And then I couldn't get comfortable. So I remember just grabbing Andrew's hand, looking, and there's a quote in there, I'm just like looking up at the beige wall of the room and just grabbing him, and tears, flooding my eyes, and just saying, I'm in so much pain right now, so much physical pain and exhaustion. And there's nothing that's going to take this away for the next month. And so just surrendering to the month of physical discomfort, not only with this, but even just the physical ailments that were happening. There's just a lot of ins and outs. But that was like a really breakthrough moment, because granted, this is nothing compared to most people's struggles throughout the world. But for in America, where we have most of our comforts, I think this is a relatable story for anyone who's ever gone through construction remodeling work. And it actually is one of the leading causes of divorce, and even suicide and major depression, when you don't have a nest, when you don't have that stability of home, and it's just this constant chaotic atmosphere. And so actually studying that after, and because I was doing research, I'm like, tell me more about this, because I'm feeling these things. And it was just so interesting to see that this was kind of the moment to put all the teachings into effect and to really release the mundane and to release the attachment. Here's one of the key teachings here: to release the attachment of feeling like you deserve comfort. Think about that for a moment. When you've had comfort your whole life, and then it gets taken away, part of us, our ego, doesn't like that. And it says, well, I have X, Y, and Z, and I should have X, Y, and Z, and now it's not here. And so the ego does not like that. And then it might want to externally blame, like the ego wants to blame the town for not speeding up the process for us, or having to go through all of the architecture work and not being able to do a lot of things our own. We were under the impression it would take 2 weeks and maybe like $10,000, when it ended up taking 6 months, and literally 4 times as much that made up our entirety of savings. And so now we're still living very meagerly paycheck to paycheck. And it was just this very huge wake-up call, going from a successful business and a very comfortable home in Arizona to buying this place and being isolated for 6 months, having no money, and then not being able to work. I wasn't, at least. And to just live in a construction zone. And then when the construction started, you wake up at 7 a.m. It was a lot of fun. And so I just wanted to share that with the release the mundane, with the understanding that a lot of it is being okay, even when all of your comforts and your pleasures are taken away. All of your comforts and pleasures. And think about that for a moment. Think about how well we would actually do in those circumstances. And that's the irony that Anderson was sharing, was that, we were like, oh, we're going to be modern monks. And then it literally throws us into, it's not fully monastic, but I mean, for monastic monks, they literally, most of them just sleep on a cot because there's a vow not to sleep in high places and comfortable places. And then you eat very meagerly food. Oftentimes you won't eat after noon, after literally 12 p.m. You don't really own, you're not allowed to really have or touch money necessarily, depending on which tradition you're in. And so literally you're just with the teachings. And all we had for many of those months when we were stuck in that standstill was just the teachings and each other. And that's it. And I thought that was just a really awesome moment of saying we can either collapse or we can rise. And I think that what we have here together in our growing community is the byproduct of us showing up in peace every single day, rather than getting angry, rather than yelling at the people trying to help us, rather than going to war with the town, going to war and fighting all these constant bills coming in. And just, I mean, I'm sure many of you can relate if you've ever been in a situation like that before, which there was a lot of bonding experiences because misery loves company. So people started telling us their horror stories of remodeling and how it did cause so much conflict in their household and in their marriage or with their family and just their health. It's crazy. And it really goes to point of how important it is to create these little nests for ourselves and more peaceful nests, but also recognize that a lot of these comforts and these pleasures that we have are not necessary for happiness, and they're not necessary for peace. Because even though we were, especially me, I was in physical pain, there was still happiness, and there were still moments of peace. I'd say after the pain went away, it was a lot easier to be in the peace and just accept things. But that's just kind of the intro story of release attachments to the mundane world that I always like to share in the book and then with you all. Because I think some of you heard that story before, but some of you have not as well, especially those listening at home. So that was just pretty cool. And then not even going to bring up the whole, and everyone can relate to this, how when you're really struggling financially and to pay every bill and all that stuff, and then you have no savings anymore, what that does to the mind in America, or really anywhere in the world. And so to still be peaceful and to still speak kindly to your partner and to your family and not lose your shit when a huge bill comes in. And so that was just, I think that really speaks to the teachings. Even if we didn't have the rest of the story, even just the money component is very enlightening that we can all learn from. That just because we're struggling financially, it doesn't give us the excuse to be jerks to each other. Quote Alaric Hutchinson. But again, and that's the irony, is like we gave up amazing comfort in Arizona because my business was doing really well. And to start fresh here, and part of starting fresh here, obviously we got to know all of you, so hey, it's that calling of what is the next location that will really help us reach more people with peace teaching, and to develop that sanctuary, develop that retreat center in the forest. And this really was the perfect location for us. So we're grateful to be here. We would do it all over again just for you. Okay, so where am I going to start here? Okay, so now that was just kind of a fun introduction and story. Now let's get into the juiciness of the teachings. So this is a quote from page 141 of the second edition of Living Peace, Release the Mundane, and you can follow along here in your little pamphlet. And if you're listening from home, you could just close your eyes and absorb the words. So the pain we feel in life often leads to one of three outcomes, or a combination of the three. First, we push down our emotions and become so hardened by the world that we act hard towards the world in return. The second outcome is that we become an emotional puddle, melting under the pain of life into tears of sorrow, often withdrawing more and more from the world each year. Or third, we allow our pain to transform us into beings of infinite compassion. Knowing what it's like to feel the sting of being alive, we can't help but feel empathy for all others and never desire to be the cause of another person's suffering. When the third outcome is cultivated in full, it's very similar in nature to the joyful sadness experienced in the galactic consciousness. Because of life, we feel pain and sadness, and because of life, we also feel joy and gratitude. And then I just add a little quote at the end. We must remain open for joy and gratitude to take root. If we never allow for vulnerability, it's as if we remain a closed flower and no co-creation ever can occur. The flower needs the bee just as the bee needs the flower to co-creative interbeing experience. And so think of all of our own lives and how we're all flowers, and a lot of times we're just like, no one can taste the nectar of our soul. So we just keep our little petals shut because we've been hurt by life. But unfortunately, if that never happens, then the bees don't get the pollen and can create their own honey of sweetness of life. And also maybe that's how we spread our seeds. And so we're not able to pollinate. And so it's this beautiful co-creative experience of the bee and the flower. And so for us, and this can even go into my own past of, going through business struggles and developing community. This time it's so much easier around because I've done this 2 times already. But anytime we're wounded by life, either in grief or in anger, that little snap shut happens. It's almost like a little Venus flytrap. And think about that for a moment. Because there are times where we could have gave up and just said, fuck it, we'll sell. And to flip it. And that could have worked. But what good would that have really brought, the community here necessarily? When we say things are too hard and then we stop striving. And when a lot of times when that happens is co-creation stops. Because it would be easy for us. It would have been easier for us to just go buy a pre-built home in the forest and just live as like happy monks alone and really introverted. But what would that really accomplish? Sure, we would have peace, but this life is about interconnection. And I think here in the West, we talked quite a bit about this on last Sunday, but here in the West, we have this individualized, heightened sense of self-worth and self-importance. And it's so weird. We'll often put our needs first above all others. And so we'll just say, screw anyone else. I don't mean to go there, but this is our country. That type of mindset, or this is my family, or this is my thing. This is my thing, and I've worked for it, and everyone else needs to work for it in equal measure. But also, we're all drained from giving too much. You see that weird balance? Because who's been in a codependent relationship before, where you just give and give and give and give and give, and you're exhausted? But then there's also this weird sense of like pride with individuality, and you're like, but this is I worked for this piece right here, and this is mine. You see how those, they brush up against each other, and it hardens the heart, and it really keeps us from being fully vulnerable with humanity. And so easily we could have just taken all the money from selling the business and just go buy a little plot and practically retire, and that would have been really nice and happy for ourselves. And say, well, this is our stuff, we worked for our piece, and that's it. No one else gets to share in it. But sure, we could live happy, but when you actually turn on the news, or you actually walk outside and then you go to the town, and you go to the village, and you see the village, you see people in conflict, and you see people suffering, do you just say that's their problem? Or do we actually take a step back and we say, let's really think about this for a moment, and let's really contemplate how we can build these bridges of communication? How can we build these bridges of teaching peace, of teaching non-duality, of teaching beyond the ego? How can we bring this into the hearts and homes of humanity? And so think of all of you right now, or those of you listening at home that may have been here in Arizona or anywhere. Think of and I do not mean to sound arrogant at this at all. It's going to sound arrogant. I'm just putting that forward. Think of if I never existed, and that we never built Earth Spirit Center for Healing. We never built the Zen Cowboy. It never came to Bayfield. And think if none of these teachings, or at least this version of the teaching, because some of you have a background in this, never actually came here. And even though it's only been 3 months, many of you have already told me how it's really helped sculpt and shift your perception, and it led to a lot of peace already in just 3 months. And it actually made you feel, maybe for the first time, a growing community here in Bayfield, where previously you weren't really able to find one. And so now I'm going to shift this to your own life and think of how maybe you've mostly been a caterpillar eating the teachings. And now our goal is to help you become bees, no, butterflies, to where you can actually shed it. You can share it with your friends and family and surrounding community. And it's not one of those things where you shove it down people's throats. Like, that's never happened here. You just naturally show up and you ask questions. You're like, this is cool. And then co-creation happens, right? And think of how many family members in your life or your friends are just like, I've noticed you're becoming a bit more peaceful. You're not reacting in the same way that you used to. You used to be a real bitch. Sorry to use that term, but it's funny. It is true. Like, you used to be a real bitch, or you used to be a real jerk, and now you're calming the fuck down. And what is this thing? What Kool-Aid are you drinking? Well, let me tell you. No. It's organic and it's non-GMO. And so what I'm really trying to cultivate here is this understanding that this life is just this, and you know this if you're parents or you're part of a family unit, but even still we don't fully grasp this. This life is not just your own. It's a collective world. And as long as we're viewing it so individualistically, especially just on a minor basis of just how we interact with people in everyday life, we're really closing that heart off, and we're not touching the heart of joyful sadness, which I'm going to get into in a moment. And so let us together start to really cultivate the soil for each and every single person in our life of peace. And how we cultivate that soil is, one, we're cultivating our own peace practice. And when we're embodying the peace teachings, people start to ask you questions. And you just kind of answer here and there with these just little nuggets of perception. You're not telling them what to believe. You're not telling them what to do. But when you're starting to have that peaceful glow, people start to notice. And that is the number one best marketing thing out there. Does that make sense? And that is I'm trying to find the perfect way to explain this, but I'm hoping that the message is landing. Because I've been doing this for 10 years, and New Age and spirituality and self-help really has, and again, there's nothing wrong with capitalism, but it really has been capitalized upon. And to where it's almost like what you're being sold is that you're going to get you're going to become the millionaire. You're going to have the inner peace. You're going to be doing all these things, but it's never about when you actually achieve these things of peace or wealth or whatever, how is that impacting the rest of the people in the world? Does that make sense? So it's so marketed to self-empowerment, not necessarily peace. Normally it's not necessarily inner peace. But it's so marketed to self-empowerment to make you feel powerful and important that once you get it, you just take it and go home. I have worked with thousands of people now in these past 10 years, and more like hundreds in the community, but thousands more when I speak. And I watch how people come and they get their peace, they get their enlightenment. I say that because if they reached it, then they wouldn't leave. They would then stay and help share with other people, whatever community you're in. But so many people, they come and they get what they want, and then they just go home. And they stop showing up for other people. Because they'll say things like, if I'm around other people who are negative, or if I'm around the people, if I watch the news, or if I do all these things, what ends up happening is I lose my peace. And so I found a way to have this little safety bubble, and it feels so good in here. It's so warm and cozy. And then I stop showing up for my friends. I stop showing up for my family. I start separating from the world. And we even see this with politics, where different parties are not even communicating across party lines anymore. And we see that it's always been there with religion. And unfortunately, that is not the path of peace, to develop your own little piece of the world and then to protect it against all others. And that just creates further separation, and the people that really could benefit from these teachings never receive it. And we had that talk with Andrew once upon a time, didn't we? Mm-hmm. where I can't remember exactly what it was, but yeah, after you practice for the first 6 months, you're like, I got this down. And then do you want to share what, and then we'll just really quick, and then we'll go into the heart of sadful joy, joyful sadness. But do you remember that where you said like you kind of got all your pieces in place and
kind of
in your apartment, and then
yeah.
If you don't remember, that's okay. I'm pulling things here. I'm sorry.
Are you talking about then how it shifted when I left?
Or how I can't remember fully, but it was something along the lines of where you're just like, I finally have this, and then you're afraid to open up a little bit more and lose it.
Oh, kind of, yeah. So, because I had moved away from my hometown, went to college, went through a lot. And when I did that, I sort of felt like I wanted to scramble and just create a little place for just me. And so, yeah, I created, I had my apartment and I had my job and I had all these things that I had always wanted. But then I started to self-isolate a lot. And so I wasn't seeing my friends as much. I wasn't calling my family as much. I wasn't doing as much because I was so afraid of letting the world in. And then I met you, and then you took me right out.
He likes to say I'm the Gandalf to his Bilbo.
Yeah.
And so we went on a great adventure.
Yeah.
And I brought him a lot of suffering. It's like, he had his little comfortable home in Arizona. And I'm like, let's change everything up and move to Colorado. Thank you for showing up and saying yes to peace. But that's the thing, is like, we had our peace, we had our success. And then we still chose to show up and transition into pain, into discomfort again, to then reach a greater crowd. You see the shift there? So, isn't that cool? So we just brought it back home. Anyway, let's take a breath, and then I want to go into a little story time theater. So 165. So as we were talking about the joy, I'm going to change it up even more. So as we were talking about the heart of joyful sadness. So when you're that flower and when you open your petals to the world, you cannot help but feel both sadness and joy. And a lot of times what happens is that maybe we'll never actually reach that point of gratitude or joy because we don't fully allow ourselves to be touched tenderly by the world. And so that's that hardening experience that I often talk about. Or possibly we're just so distracted by the buzz of life that we never really feel anything so fully. Or maybe we fully collapse in our grief because grief is different than sadness. And when you're in grief, you really can't feel anything else. It's very all-consuming. But when you're in sadness, and I'm going to talk about the difference in the sadness, it is awakening. I'll just share that. One magical night at my parents' home, they, my husband, and I witnessed the first snowfall since our move to Colorado. We were high up in the mountains when the flakes began to float down, and we were all happy, warm, and cozy inside their new home, observing the beauty through the large windows. This is the top of Forest Lakes, by the way. My mom reached for my hand with a smile and said, "Let's remember this moment forever." She looked so beautiful and peaceful as she gazed out into the sky. And it was as if I was glimpsing into her past when she was a little girl in West Virginia watching the snowfall with her mother. That loving moment was forever embedded into my heart. I later shared this glimpse with my husband, expressing that it had made me feel a joyfulness and a sadness all at the same time. During that beautiful moment with my mom, it seemed as if time had stopped to intermingle past, present, and future. I had stepped outside my body to become simply an observer witnessing the miracle of life. The sadness was not the usual sadness of grief or upset, but rather a beautiful sadness honoring that everything we as humans experience, including our very lives, is temporary, born to fade and pass away. Nothing lasts. We cannot hold a snowflake long before it melts, nor can we hold on to moments long before they become memories that fade. This is what it means to be alive, and that night I felt the joyful sadness that came from touching and accepting the wisdom of the galactic consciousness. Deep breath. And when I really think about that, it can make me cry again, because it's almost like past, present, and future all intermingle in this moment. And I see my mom's, the beginning of her life, and I can see her before I was born. And then I can see her raising me, and then I could see her now, and I can see when she's about to fade into non-physical. And all of these things intermingle, creating a beautiful existence, a beautiful life to be lived. But what happens when we get stressed? What happens when we have anxiety? We nip that cord off from seeing life, from seeing beauty, and we stop seeing each other as the fullness of who they are. And instead, they only become caricatures of our own stress, our own grief, our own suffering, our own anxiety. Who's been married or had a relationship with anyone? Even a dog, that works too. And when your mind is full of things, a bit neurotic, a bit crazy. Crazy I don't view as a bad word. I just view it as just, my box of crazy's out and I'm not present. And I'm stressed out and I'm full of anxiety and a lot of emotions. You don't see the people around you anymore. All you can see is your own stress. Life itself becomes filtered with your own neurosis. And you behave in ways that really harm people, including yourself. And so you may feel grief and you may feel ecstasy, because excitement, you can experience those waves of excitement, but it's not necessarily peace. And you have this pendulum swing. But when you actually hit the heart, the vulnerable heart within yourself, there is a beautiful combination of joyful sadness. And again, it's not the sadness that comes from grief. It is the sadness that comes from everything is impermanent. And it is an inspired sadness that brings you joy, because you'll never want to take 1 minute for granted again with anyone in your life, even if they're causing you pain. Because when you can fully see someone, you realize they're not attacking you at all. They're just in their own out of alignment. They're in their own neurosis. And so when you see someone that's attacking you or harming you, and I'm speaking more like emotionally or mentally, not like, that's that's a different story we get into. Sometimes people try to dissuade this teaching because they want to take it to the extreme. But I'm just speaking on the everyday foundation of just how we're sometimes jerks to each other or ourselves. And so really think about that for a moment. Let's breathe that in. So in Shambhala, Chogyam Trungpa talks about basic goodness. And it's not goodness in the sense of duality. It's the basic goodness that at the heart, at the end of the day, there's just this natural harmony among all life. The sun rises, the sun sets. When we sit on the earth, we don't fall through it. It's there to support us. Heaven above us. All these things are just supporting us. And there's this natural goodness and flow to the universe. Again, when I'm saying this basic goodness that I'm reading, don't think of the opposite of badness. Just think of the natural harmony that exists between all things living. Basic goodness is very closely connected to the idea of bodhicitta in the Buddhist tradition. Bodhi means awake or wakeful, and citta means heart. Bodhicitta is awakened heart. Such awakened heart comes from being willing to face your state of mind. That may seem like a great demand, but it is necessary. You should examine yourself and ask how many times you have tried to connect with your heart, fully and truly. How often have you turned away because you feared you might discover something terrible about yourself? How often have you been willing to look at and face yourself in the mirror without feeling embarrassed? How many times have you tried to shield yourself by reading the newspaper, watching television, or just spacing out? That is the $64,000 question. How much have you connected with yourself at all in your whole life? When you awaken your heart in this way, you find to your surprise that your heart is empty. You find that you are looking into outer space. What you are, who you are, where is your heart? If you really look, you won't find anything tangible and solid. When you look in and you feel judgment or a grudge or that neurosis, it feels very heavy when you look within. But when you actually get to the part of vulnerability and opening the flower of your heart, It's the emptiness that is often talked about in Zen. When you actually ask yourself repeatedly, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? You're going to come up with a lot of answers, but all of them are hollow. And that is when we finally get to release self and we realize that all of these illusions, these projections, these delusions that we're creating ourselves to be, and then mirroring and filtering every single person experience that we're having through this lens of our perceived personality, all of it is hollow. And when we're doing that, all we're seeing is the projection of our own mind. When we look at someone and we say, I see them and I feel love, or when I look at someone, I see them and I feel loathing, all of that has to do with you and nothing regarding the other person that is triggering you. Because when you have a heart at peace and an awakened heart, you don't get triggered in that way by humanity anymore. Because you realize there's nothing left to trigger. And that emptiness that is within, that hollowness of self, it is joyful and sad at the same time, because it leads to infinite compassion. Like I was sharing with my mother's story at the beginning, how I was able to transcend out of that moment and just see the collection of her life, and how I can sometimes do that with many of you here and see the beauty incarnate. That's a beautiful word. Write down, beauty incarnate. Let's breathe that in. So I'm going to end with a story, a Taoist story, The Tao of Daily Life by Derek Lin, page 165. The Buddha in your home. Have you been taking loved ones for granted? Once upon a time in ancient China, a young man said goodbye to his parents and embarked on a trip to a foreign land. His goal was to visit the Bodhisattva Wuji. On his way there, he encountered an old monk. "Where are you going?" the monk inquired. The young man replied that he was going to study under the Bodhisattva. Seeking the Bodhisattva cannot compare to seeking the Buddha, asserted the old man. The young gentleman agreed The young man agreed with this, for although Bodhisattva Wuji was a person of great wisdom, the Buddha was the absolute paragon of enlightenment for which there was no equal. The young man then asked the old monk where he could find Buddha. The old monk surprisingly said to him that the Buddha was at this moment at his house where he left not long ago, his very own home. The young man wondered how he would recognize the Buddha. The old monk had the answer to this as well. When you get home, you'll see someone wearing a blanket with shoes on backward coming to greet you. That is the Buddha. Something about the old monk's certainty convinced the young man, so he hurried home. By the time he got there, it was already the middle of the night. His mother had already gone to bed, but when she heard her son knocking on the door, she was beside herself with happiness. Like all parents, she had been worried about her child's safety on such a long journey. She rushed out to greet him immediately. She grabbed her blanket rather than put on a coat, and in her joyful haste, was totally oblivious to the fact that she had put on her slippers the wrong way. The young man took one look at his elderly mother and saw the look of pure joy on her face. Recalling to the mind the monk's words, he suddenly became enlightened. Deep breath. And so we often mistakenly think that the teachings are somewhere else, out here. And a lot of people will throw away their relationships with either loved ones or even just the world as a whole. I can't tell you how many people I've met who've just pretty much thrown the world as a whole, just out with the water and the baby out the window with what's that damn saying? Out the window with the baby in the bathwater. And so who has felt so disheartened looking at the world or looking even at your own family and your own relationships, and you then want to seek something external? You're always looking for something to make you feel better, to something to make you feel fulfilled, to make something that will bring you peace or happiness or pleasure. Well, with the Buddha's teachings, it's already there. It's in your home. Wherever your home is, it's there. And a lot of times, I've seen this happen so many times. we stop seeing people for who they really are. And as I was saying, we only see the projection in our mind. And the reason why this young monk or this young man reached enlightenment was because he was able to see his mother for the first time. And that was the awakening. Deep breath. And so in conclusion, the Buddha does teach that the awakening, the awakened heart is already present within each and every single one of us. Buddha nature is already present in each and every single one of us. Enlightenment, there's no such thing as original sin. There's actually original blessing. All of it is already within. And when you can actually look at other people as Buddhas, it actually helps reflect back that awareness that it's already present. And when you start to treat everyone in that way, in that grace, then it leads to an incredible amount of unity. But one of the leading factors that stops us is our attachment to the mundane, is our attachment to our physicality, is our attachment to our pleasures and our excitements and our comforts. And these things really start to cloud us up. And of course, the attachment that we have to ourselves. And we'll be going into that more in the next couple of weeks. Deep breath and thank you. Whew. So for those of you who joined us today, thank you. Thank you so much for joining in. And I will post links down below to our website if you ever want to work one-on-one for a Zen session, or if you ever want to donate. And also soon I'll be setting up a Patreon account with additional teachings that you can access. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And have a blessed, blessed week.